crash of '29, there was a terrible economic disaster in this country. They call it the Great Depression. In 1933, in trying to deal with this, the United States was actually on the verge of bankruptcy. There were a lot of unemployed people. They were trying to implement a beginning of socialism in this country. They implemented a law that was passed during World War I. It was called the Trading with the Enemies Act. It was determined that they could use this to fight the economic war, that it didn't have to be a shooting war. It could be any kind of a war or any kind of a national emergency. So they implemented by executive order the Trading with the Enemies Act in 1933. Which literally put the United States and its citizens under emergency rule, which means the Constitution, habeas corpus, things like that are suspended. Now, they didn't tell the people that. And in the law, it specifically exempted the American people as being the enemy. Now, in 1937, they reissued the executive order again, only this time they left out that passage and the American people became the enemy. Now, we've been living under that declaration of emergency ever since then. So the concept that anyone in this country is protected by the Constitution today, or has been since 1933, is erroneous. It's false. And that's why they've been able to do many of the things that we've questioned. Like, how can they do that? That's against the Constitution. Obviously, that's against the Constitution. That's illegal. But they're doing things all the time, constantly, that tell us that the Constitution is no longer in force. Now, later, in 1945, Harry Truman signed the United Nations Treaty. It was ratified by the Senate, and they pushed through Congress, and Harry Truman signed the United Nations Participation Act. They immediately pushed through and signed the National Security Act of 1947, and created a veil of secrecy behind which they could operate to bring power into the hands of the United Nations and destroy the sovereignty of all the nations of the world. The Cold War was actually a manipulation of the people of the world to give them a fake enemy to pretend, so that the government could pretend that the reason that they were doing all the things that they were doing and building the military forces and developing the technology that they were developing was to fight this supposed enemy, this ideological enemy of the Soviet Union. And they were doing the same thing in the Soviet Union, telling the people there that we were their enemy. In reality, this had all been agreed on by the Big Three when they met several times during World War II. And during these meetings, by the way, the reason why after World War II there was never another big war, and all wars were surrogate wars fought in third world nations, the agreement was, according to the documentation that I saw when I was with the Office of Naval Intelligence, that for population control, to keep the attention of the public away from what was really happening, which was bringing about of a one world government, a totalitarian socialist world government, the destruction of sovereign nations, that they would fight these surrogate wars, and there would be no winner of any of these wars. And if you look since that time, no one has won any wars, and no one has gained any territory through fighting of these wars. Now, when Kennedy became president, he signed the first executive order creating what's called FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It was put into place to take over local, state, and federal government in case, and this is the way it was worded, in case of invasion by a foreign power or nuclear attack upon the United States. Knock it off. Got my daughter and her dog in the studio playing here.
That's okay.
So anyway, he signed this executive order. This created the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They also began back in the 50s creating underground, literally cities. All across the country there are these underground cities that have their own water supply and everything. They're under a mountain in Virginia, there's a place called Mount Weather where they even have a government in waiting. They have a president there, which has not been elected. They have a full cabinet there. They have departments of all of the government agencies in the United States, and down there waiting in this place called Mount Weather. And they also have a computer data bank with a master warrant list where they're collecting the names and addresses of known patriots and patriot leaders who will fight the overthrow of the Constitution overtly, and the absorption of the United States overtly into the United Nations, and the transfer of power of our armed forces to the United Nations, making them, in effect, a world police force along with the military forces of what used to be called the Soviet Union. Later on, Nixon elaborated on these executive orders. He changed them around, took out invasion by a foreign country or attack by a nuclear weapon, and it's worded very curiously now, and then Reagan changed it, but now the wording says, in case of internal unrest or economic instability.
Of course, they can generate that at any time they want to.
That's right.